these companies have been crossing the line to boost their bottom line. Rather than stop this outrage, Washington has let them get away with it. We'll establish a credit card bill of rights. Americans need to pay what they owe, but they should pay what's fair, not what fattens the profits for some credit card company.
The average American has about $9,000 worth of credit card debt. Almost everyone I know is bringing that average up, not down. Tomorrow, now President Obama will get his chance to follow through on what you just saw there, which was candidate Obama's campaign trail tough talk about credit cards. He will be meeting executives from 14 credit card companies at the White House. Of course, a lot has changed since Obama's days talking about credit cards on the campaign stump. For starters, the economy dissolved like mascara during a crying jag. Treasury Department efforts to bail out the financial sector have so far doled out more than $120 billion of taxpayer money to banks that offer credit cards. The plan was that banks would use free money from taxpayers to lend more to taxpayers. But the banks sort of went with a different plan. Their plan involved passing their financial pain on to the very consumers whose tax dollars they had been given to fix the lending problem and grease the gears of the economy again. Their response to the crisis was a sort of financial defensive crouch, closing accounts, reducing credit limits, increasing credit card fees. And so far, they have gotten away with it. Today, the House Financial Services Committee, though, approved the Credit Card Holders Bill of Rights, named for the president's campaign pledge. The question now is, will the candidate who talked so tough about regulating these credit card companies as a candidate actually follow through as president? Will the credit card companies use tomorrow's meeting to wriggle out of more regulation yet again? Or is this where it will start to seem to them that it matters that Democrats are in control now in Washington, not Republicans? Joining us now is Congressman Barney Frank, chair of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman Frank, thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
I'm glad to. This is an important thing to talk about.
Another credit card regulation bill passed the House last year but died in the Senate. Do you think there is a better chance this year?
Yes, very much, Rachel, and I'm glad you pointed that out. Yes, the president did talk about it, but to give Carolyn Maloney, who's the congresswoman from New York who took the lead on this, and then the rest of us who've worked with her, we really did start this before the presidential campaign, and in 2008, beginning the work in 2007, we did pass a bill. It died in the Senate. This is unfortunately a partisan issue. We consistently get opposition from the Republicans, but here's why I'm optimistic. First of all, we were able to do a somewhat tougher bill this year than last year. We have more Democrats, and as you point out, the climate has changed. The notion that regulation makes you sterile is no longer as popular as it once was. People now understand that you need to have vigorous rules to protect consumers and the whole economy, indeed, against abuse. And here's the statistic. In 2008, when there were 33 Republicans on the committee that I chair, only 2 of them voted with us to regulate credit cards. This year, the Republican membership is down to 29 because there's a change in the House numbers, and 9 of them voted with us. Still a minority, but a bigger minority. In the Senate, from 51 Democrats, we've gone to 59, as soon as Norm Coleman decides that reality has to be faced. And there's also this public pressure. So I think you are going to see a tougher bill this time than before. And we've been in touch with the White House. Tomorrow, the president's going to talk about adding a couple of other things that will strengthen the regulation that I'm very much supporting. And this bill will be on the floor of the House next week. It will pass the House, I believe, with an overwhelming majority. A majority of Republicans will be against it, but we'll get a significant number of Republicans who do understand political survival. And I think given the president, given the good work of Senator Dodd, who's been very strong on this, I think we're likely to see a bill signed by the president this year.
To what do you attribute the increase in Republican opposition to these efforts? Why have they become more opposed?
I'm trying to remember which British literary figure said the impending death concentrates the mind. I think the fear of defeat is what I would attribute it to. Also, there has been a change in the sense of, again, we go back to 1981 and Ronald Reagan saying government is not the answer to our problem, government is the problem. Well, we've had 20-some-odd years of that philosophy, and it's brought us disaster. So I think it is largely political fear. Let me give you one other very important point. Ordinarily, the minority likes to ask for roll calls to show where they are, and they're the ones who ask for roll calls. You take a voice vote in Congress, and generally the side that wins the voice vote is very happy, we won the vote. The other side that's unhappy asks for a roll call, as they have a right to do. Today, when I called for the vote, and it was overwhelmingly a yes vote, the Republicans didn't ask for the roll call. We did, because we wanted to make them take this position. So, the fact that we've gone from 2 to 9, the fact that they didn't want to vote, in their heart of hearts, they still don't like this, but they want to get reelected.
There's much been made of the political power, the lobbying power of the banking industry. That's been the common wisdom explanation for why regulation like this hasn't passed before. Obviously, in the context of the bailout, it seems like their lobbying power, their political capital should be diminished. Is that going to be a factor moving forward?
Yes, it's clearly diminished, but there's one other factor. Look, I know it's fashionable to kind of denigrate partisanship, but there are differences between the parties. And on whether or not you regulate to protect consumers, and as I said, the economy is one of them. Many of us wanted to do credit card reform, but until the end of 2006, the Republicans controlled Congress. Tom DeLay was the majority leader. He gave orders to the committee, no such bill will be considered. It's not an accident that the first bill came in the last Congress, which was the first one where we Democrats were back in control. We were pushing ahead, but as I've acknowledged, it's a better bill this year than it was last year for the reasons you say. One, it's a little bit hard to say, oh, the government is the problem, when you are into the government for about $100 billion. I mean, the conservative mantra flipped from Ronald Reagan, government is the problem, to the Bush administration going around to the financial industry and saying what conservatives used to say was a bad joke, we're from the government, we're here to help you. The inconsistency between extending large amounts to the banks and then saying, but the government can't intervene, I think that was simply no longer sustainable.
Are you aggravated that the Washington Post is reporting that at least $10 million of bailout money has been turned around from the top bailout recipients to be spent on lobbying in Washington? Does that seem inappropriate to you?
Well, inappropriate and aggravated. I got to be honest, I spend a lot of my time being aggravated, so that's probably not a good metric. Yeah, I think there's excessive lobbying, although lobbying go two ways. Let me give you an example. Last Friday, I'd taken a day off, and in my absence, it turned out that a woman who lives in my district in the town of Dartmouth, Massachusetts, next to the city of New Bedford, got a letter from a credit card company, Capital One, that said, you can't have a credit card because you live in a bad neighborhood, in fact, and worsening economic conditions in your area. She actually happens to live in a fairly prosperous area, even though there's unemployment in the whole area. But the notion that she should be penalized for where she lives, it was outrageous. So when I got back to Washington on Monday, I called the company, and what I did, and see, lobbying can be a two-way street. I called the lobbyist. Now, I said, we're about to legislate on this. I really am very upset that you would say that my district is declining, and you shouldn't be doing that to individuals anyway. Within an hour, they called me back, and they rescinded that geographic policy. So, and not just for my constituent, but for everybody. So lobbyists, done well, they can be a form of communications. My problem is what they lobby for. Some of them are still being, I think, somewhat hard-headed and not understanding. You can't consistently maintain the position that the government should provide us funding. And I'm for that if it's done right, because we do need to get the credit system going again. But we'll take the money, and you can't tell us what to do. There's a great quote that I want to use. I guess I'm in a quoting mood today. But a great member of Congress named Gus Hawkins, who just died at 100, the first African-American west of the Mississippi to be elected. He represented Los Angeles. His successor in his tradition is a tough legislator, consumer friend, Maxine Waters. He was sponsoring the bill which said that if you took federal money, you couldn't discriminate based on race or gender, etc. And when people complained, he said, if you're going to stick your fingers in the federal till, you can't complain if a little democracy rubs off on them. And we're going to make that same argument for consumer protection.
Congressman Barney Frank, chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. I know that you called the lobbyist for your constituent, but I think if you'd called the head of the company, you probably would have gotten the same result at this point.
Well, he might have been flying around somewhere, Rachel. He might not have.
That's fair enough.
I might not have reached him.
Congressman Frank, thanks for coming on the show tonight. I really appreciate it.